Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode number 33 of Circle of Fellows. This is a monthly broadcast from the International Association of Business Communicators, in which a group of fellows get together and address the editorial theme of the month for IABC. And we have a great panel today to talk about the role of the CEO in an increasingly values-driven marketplace. And there are a lot of studies that have been conducted over the last couple of years that speak to the need to do this. A number of thought leaders, including Paul Holmes, have come out and said it's time for CEOs to step out of the shadows. So it should be an interesting conversation. It's quite a change from what we have seen with CEOs and organizations basically remaining kind of quiet when it comes to divisive social and political issues. Want to let everyone know that you can participate in this if you are watching live by sending a tweet and including the hashtag COF33. That's for Circle of Fellows episode number 33. So COF33. And we already have a question from our most loyal viewer, Brian Kilgore. And we'll get to that in just a little bit. First, I should introduce myself. I'm Shel Holtz. I am an IABC Fellow. I am Director of Internal Communications at WebCore. And welcome to my office here in downtown San Francisco. And I am the host of the For Immediate Release Podcast Network, where the podcast for Circle of Fellows resides. We have three fellows joining me today. We were supposed to have four. Dr. Amanda Hamilton Atwell was going to be with us from South Africa, but Amanda unfortunately took ill. And I'm sure we all hope that she is feeling better and will be able to join us in an upcoming broadcast. But we won't be without commentary because three terrific panelists remain. And I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves. I'm going to go left to right as you appear in the thumbnails on my screen, which may not be the same way it appears on your screen. But Ned, that makes you first.
Thank you, Shel. I'm Ned Lundquist. I am a communicator living in Springfield, Virginia. I work for a company called MCR and also have my own consulting business called Echo Bridge. And I'm really pleased to be here today. Thank you, Shel.
Thank you, Ned. Good to have you here. Jim, you are second.
Good morning. Good to be with you. Thank you, Shel, for the invitation and a chance to talk about this really vital topic. I'm based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I have clients in every state and much of Canada, and some international clients beyond that, but mostly it's U.S. and Canada. I'm always looking for trouble, and that's generally when you meet me, except in programs like this. I work a lot with chief executives and senior executives who are in trouble, often of their own making. So that's me. Thank you.
Great. And Letty, you are last to go.
Thank you, Shel. Good morning. I'm very glad to participate in this panel. I'm Leticia Narvaez. I'm based in Mexico City, and I help organizations build communication bridges strategically. I'm a founding partner of my own consulting firm on business communication, social responsibility, reputation management, and change management. So that's what I do.
Excellent. So let's jump into this topic. And I want to start with a couple of paragraphs from a recent New York Times article that points out that 64% of people say that CEOs should take the lead on change rather than waiting for government to impose it. This is citing the results of the Edelman Trust Barometer, a poll of 33,000 people across 28 markets around the world. The poll found that 84% expect CEOs to inform conversations and policy debates on one or more issues, and 56% said they have no respect for CEOs who remain silent on important issues. And to that, I will add that last year's Trust Barometer from Edelman in 2017 found that 75% of the world population believes that companies should balance their pursuit of profit with actions that improve economic and social conditions in the communities where they operate. I know from a lot of reading that I have done on this, that this is driving people to make decisions about who they will work for, who they will buy from, and who they will invest in. So what does this do to the role of the CEO, especially in terms of that person's obligation to essentially be the chief spokesperson for the organization?
I'll go first. I was in India once talking to the CEO of an airline, and I asked him who was in charge of communications for his company, and he said, I am. Now, I know he had some agency support, but he had this idea that he, and he alone, was ultimately responsible and accountable for communicating with his key stakeholders. And I was really impressed by that. And he didn't hesitate to say that. I think when you are the CEO, you cited some really interesting business drivers for being out there in front of issues, Shel, but it's also an opportunity to speak to your organization's values. And if you don't have values, it's really hard to do that. But if you do, this is a chance to exemplify your values by taking your values and putting it into something tangible that people can understand. And that explains your organization better than any vision statement, value statement, mission statement, I think.
Shel, I think this is still pretty controversial among CEOs. The more traditional behavior among their peers has been to, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. It's been, to be quiet and let others do the talking. But I think the statistics you cite are really powerful because times are changing. And CEOs are going to have to get used to this. I think the issue for us as communicators is we really have to do our homework about this sort of thing. One of the 3 articles that's published in Communication World this month, apropos of this particular topic, uses Nike as an example. And Nike, of course, in the last half a month has lost, 12.5 executives because someone's finally stood up and said, hey, you guys are behaving badly, you have to go. And they went. So one of the things, there are some risks in people doing this. And one of the risks is that we really have to do due diligence on who's going to stand up and talk, especially the CEO, because the trend is, and what often happens is that their public statements trigger internal statements that become external. So the thing that to think about here, when I have a CEO who is interested in doing this, who's not doing it, we have a pretty serious conversation about his relationship to the organization, the things that have gone on since he's become CEO, the issues he's facing, and it's a pretty important step going forward, simply because the environment of CEOs is changing due to the Me Too movement and the other circumstances that are happening, where those who know things have remained quiet as well, but now are triggered when the CEO makes a presentation or becomes visible. The other thing I'd mention about this is some CEOs really like to do this, and rogue. And once they start talking, they can't shut up. But I'll talk more about that. Things to be cautious about.
Letty,
Yes.
I know this is something that we've been talking about a lot for several years now in the U.S. I don't hear a lot about it outside of the U.S. Is this something that CEOs in Mexico and Central America are grappling with?
Yes, they are definitely starting to speak much more than 10 or 15 years ago. There was a study that Weber Shandwick developed last year. I don't know if you are aware of it, but it was very interesting because although it was mainly focused on the American people, they also asked some people around the world in different countries. And there is a definite assertion that, yes, the CEO should speak more because they really contribute to shape the external environment, to shape different current issues and it's very not it's not well seen that they do not speak, that they remain silent, because it's like a tacit approval of what's going on. There have been many examples of CEOs that have spoken when they do not agree with different issues. What I really think is that what the CEOs speak about, it should be aligned, and they should develop the business case. They should be aligned with their business and with the values of the company. So it's very important, and we will speak later maybe about the role of the communicator there, in order to see and plan and work together with the CEO to develop a strategy on how should they speak and what messages and what kind of subjects they should touch when they speak about anything.
I agree with you entirely, Letty, that any position that the leaders take or that the company takes should be aligned with the organization's values. And I think that one of the things that we have been seeing, and probably saw it a little more in the early days of the Trump administration than we have since then, is CEOs hearing something and then just sort of spouting off because they're offended, and the rest of the organization learning that way that suddenly this is their organization's policy. But if it is aligned with your values, or it is directly related to your business interests, and I'm thinking, for example, of Target deciding that they were going to address the transgender issue with their bathrooms, because people come into their stores and use their bathrooms, right? It's not that they're coming completely out of left field on this issue. They have a business interest in that. But Brian Kilgore has asked, if I can find here it is. He says, U.S. law requires boards to maximize shareholder value. The question being is addressing what might be a divisive social or political issue creating a risk that you're going to lose some of your customers and some of your investors. And just to sort of inform this discussion a little more, a Burson-Marsteller report found that 98% of institutional investors say a company with strong environmental, social, and governance initiatives, that's ESG, is a more appealing investment. 57% of consumers are more likely to buy from or boycott a brand based on its stance on a political issue. They're also 30% more likely to make purchase decisions based on a brand's values than they were a mere 3 years earlier. And this all suggests that taking these issues...
All those data tend to scare CEOs because, the first rule of being a spokesperson is having something to say. And I think the issue about values and resident is cool, but the real issue for these people often, because their peers are still not enthusiastic about doing this, are often the first people they turn to rather than their communicators about doing this. And most of them, I think, are still discouraging this unless you have a platform, something you're going to talk about. So I think this is where we provide this sort of really unique sense of service to these people by helping them shape the things they want to talk about, which can include the values and that sort of thing, but also understanding some of the minefields and potholes you get into, and you mentioned a couple, Shel, in the data, because people are making up their minds about where you stand on issues. If you want to make a comment on guns, that's interesting, but you're going to raise a furor somewhere about that. To make a comment about any of the other controversial issues of the day, even if it reflects the values of your company, you need to be ready for people to react, which I tend to like. I think communicators do. We want to have a conversation going forward, but the basis of it is really, it starts really with the values of the CEO himself or herself, as opposed to the values of the organization, because that's really the root they're drawing from to make the comment. So I always like to start with what these people think and what they think about, and the kinds of things they think are important to talk about, to which they could make a reasonable contribution, and therefore maybe have a contribution to the reputation of the organization. That's positive.
Yes, and I think that something that we should be aware of is that CEOs more and more are being aware that there is a higher purpose than only maximizing shareholder value, but they should also be take care of the employees, customers, schools, all the community to which they are linked up. So it's very important that they focus on that when they speak. Another thing that is important to be aware of is that the millennials now and other generations think differently about the participation of the CEOs now. Millennials really are demanding, and they really like that the CEO takes the responsibility and the duty of speaking, representing the company about the different current issues that are affecting the society. So, and for example, millennials really think that they should do them instead of the baby boomers of the Generation X, that they are more conservative, and they sometimes think that the CEOs are speaking only to get on the news. So we need to focus also to be aware of the different audiences that we have, and what every of these generations are demanding from the CEOs now as their responsibility in the community.
And I think we have to be aware of the possibility that your CEO could be misquoted or taken out of context, and that can sometimes run away from you through social media, resulting in things like boycotts, just because somebody has decided to frame the argument that way. And you can have a great reputation. It takes a while to build that, and you can lose it very quickly. If one of the articles in the recent issue of Communication World talked about how the CEO of United Airlines, Oscar Munoz, was named the Communicator of the Year by PR Week. And then right after that, there were social media issues regarding people taking off United flights against their will. I was sitting next to someone on a United flight on Monday who happened to be a PhD, a department chair at a major university. And he says, yeah, I fly United, but, United, and he was Asian. He said, I fly United, but, United has a problem with minorities. And at first I didn't know what he was talking about. And then I realized that these issues that have been, regarding people taking off airplanes, this becomes sticks in people's mind and creates a new reputation. It changes your brand perception.
I think just to back up a second, these are all really high-minded thoughts from us, business case and all the rest of it. But when someone starts speaking out, they really have to have something. They have to have a basis of thinking to carry on a discussion. You can stand up and talk and belabor about something or bloviate about something, but I find that most CEOs are really unprepared for this even today. I think also one of the recent articles in Communications World for this month, I think, was about the increased stress on CEOs. And the writer made the point that the CEO generally used to have a couple of reports, and now they have maybe a dozen to 24 reports. Along with that, the list of issues that CEOs are being involved in has expanded dramatically. I mean, in the old days, we used all kinds of spokespeople from within the organization to do the talking, some of the talking we're talking about today. But because there's pressure on for what I call non-operating activity, the job of the CEO has really changed, and there's a lot to think about. And she has a lot more voices coming at them every day, including ours, about what they ought to be doing to get things done. So most CEOs, I think, that I've been working with in this area for a while, know how important it is and know how it can really make the barometer move for their company and for themselves. But I also find that there's still a fairly large kind of reticence to do this, simply because they're really unprepared to speak publicly, even though we have a lot of CEOs who are doing it. A lot of famous CEOs are doing it, and setting good examples. But there's some real important groundwork that has to be set, I think, with these people from the beginning to help them get a set of ideas and issues in mind that they can really make a contribution to.
Yeah, I really wish I could remember who it was who I think I was at a conference where somebody was speaking and they said CEO, of course, stands for Chief Executive Officer. but it should also stand for customers, employees, and owners, because that is the constituency that the CEO needs to be most concerned about. And you have a president and a chief operating officer who spend their time dealing with the day-to-day operations of the organization. The CEO needs to be out there selling the company's story to customers, employees, and owners, making sure that the purpose is clear and why would you want to work, invest, or buy from us. And increasingly, as people are thinking about values and issues and the state of social justice and the like, isn't it incumbent upon CEOs to start to figure out how to find their voice? And Jim, I thought it was interesting that you raised the issue of guns, because Bank of America and a couple of others, in the wake of the Parkland high school shooting in Florida, rethought their relationships with gun manufacturers and did so very publicly. And I'm sure that wasn't a knee-jerk thing because somebody was offended by what happened. I'm sure they looked at the number of people who buy and own weapons in the United States versus those who don't, and said there's not much of a risk here to our business.
Well, and Dick's Sporting Goods announced publicly that they are going to no longer sell really the more automatic versions of weapons, and one of the manufacturers this week announced that they're not going to sell any guns to Dick's Sporting Goods. So the industry itself is trying to figure out and weave its way through this whole circumstance as it's evolving as well. But I think my main concern when executives go forward and choose to do this, that they're choosing to do it as opposed to being pummeled by people like us to say, you've got to do this, look at the numbers, this is happening, blah, blah, blah. Your first question again is, what are you going to say? What do you believe in? Who are you as a person? Because that's what's going to be exposed as you step forward, particularly in today's world, where the CEO used to be 60% of the CEO's time today is spent on non-operating issues, angry people, legislation, regulation, issues affecting their products and markets, which they didn't deal with before. So asking them to suddenly become spokespeople is you have to make, I think, really sensible case for it, and recognize that this adds to the discomfort of having this job.
Yes, and building on what you're saying, Jim, I think that the smart CEO should choose the issues that they are going to talk about and develop the messages in advance and not let that the issues choose them. For example, in Mexico and Latin America, there are many other current issues that are quite important, like, as safety and corruption and violence and many others, taking care of the water and many others. And there are some examples of CEOs that have spoken about that, and they have really influenced legislation and government policy, like when you invest in a plant in different states, but you try to raise the issue, and this is a pressing issue, and you really are shaping and influencing the legislation on that state. So I believe that's important. And in some other ways, it's not only the CEOs, but I think that we need to be aware that it's also important that the executive committee, all the other management team should be aware of the plan. And some of them should also speak, not only the CEO, and they must be aligned on what the CEO is doing, because this will really influence on different issues in the society.
Yeah, I think it's not just the executives who need to be brought on board, but employees. I think when Target and some of the other organizations made their announcements about the transgender issue, half of the frontline employees who walked into work the next day were probably unhappy with that decision. That's a divisive issue. But Letty, I think you're also right that other executives need to be brought on board, particularly CMOs are starting to address this issue, chief marketing officers. I pulled a quote here and neglected to grab the attribution for the quote, but it says, "The once timid, always playing it safe marketer has become the corporate face of the Trump resistance and warmed to getting involved in fraught political waters." And, one example of this, and I actually think it was before the presidential election in 2016, Wells Fargo ran a commercial. It was a fairly benign commercial. It was a montage of different families who benefited from their financial services. And one of the families they showed was a same-sex couple. And as a result of that, a religious right advocacy organization withdrew their funds from that bank. It was millions of dollars, and took their business elsewhere. Now, just as an aside, I thought it was interesting that the bank they deposited those funds in was the lead sponsor of the Gay Pride Parade in the city where they were headquartered. So I don't know how much research they did about where they were putting their money. But still, the bank, Wells Fargo, again, is the one that did the ad. You would think that they would know that some people would say, this is not consistent with our values, and therefore we're not going to do business with this bank. And they had to be ready to assume some losses.
Well, an example on a lot of different levels. But my suggestion is, if we have someone who's interested in doing this or feels the pressure, to start internally. And this speaks to the thing you were talking about, Shel, and we were also talking about this morning. That was this notion of essentially having other people in on the process of getting this done. Every year, one, two, or three business organizations publishes the main reasons that executives lose their jobs each year, and the list is pretty understandable. No, they didn't do what they promised. They went off on someplace else. The CEOs are over optimistic. They're often better PR people than we are. They're stuck in the mud. But one of the things that one of the biggest reasons CEOs lose their job is over optimism, and that is when they're explaining what's going on in the company, it doesn't match with what is actually going on in the company. And I think that we're going to see more and more of an addition to this list, which is essentially overexposure. So my advice to these folks is to get in tune with the organization they're leading by beginning to make presentations inside the organization. And one of the biggest problems we have globally in organizations is, the concept of civility and decency. And this is a topic that most of these people can talk about as a calming factor inside the organization, and sort of get those muscles working in practice and get some reaction from people who are on their side and who they can trust, who can talk about these things. Going straight to customers can be pretty risky.
Shel, there was a election in Malaysia earlier this week or within the last few days. And in Malaysia, a major airline is Air Asia, and the CEO of Air Asia, Tony Fernandez, had been very vocal in his support of the ruling government to the extent of actually painting planes in the colors with the slogans of the government, and actually changing uniform colors to go with the coalition's colors, and was very upfront in supporting the government, and the government lost. That put him in a very difficult situation, and apologized, and actually said that he did all that because he was under pressure by the government. So, and it cost, it had an impact on their share prices. I think they lost about 13% in the day or two after the market opened. So what you say has an impact, and getting involved in political situations can be fraught with peril.
Yeah, another way that it can be fraught with peril, as Boeing was one of the companies that discovered when the CEO made a statement that took issue with a presidential administration policy, was that the president tweeted out something negative about Boeing, and they saw their share price plummet. So there are risks, but you're better off if these are values you've already articulated, and that those values are stated with integrity. That is, there's no gap between your statement that this is something that your company believes in and bakes into the way it behaves, and the way it actually behaves and the way the processes are run in the organization.
And I believe congruency is quite important. The point of view that the CEO expresses have to be aligned with actions. Because as you mentioned, Shel, before, if he speaks about something and then they are acting in different ways, then the consumers, the clients, and the employees perceive this, and then it can be more negative than positive. So that's why it's very important to have a strategic communication plan developed with the CEO in order to have to get alignment on what they are saying.
Before we continue, for those who have joined us late, we are taking questions from the audience in real time. Just tweet your question and use the hashtag COF33. That's for Circle of Fellows episode number 33. COF33 is the hashtag. And I'll toss your question out to the panel. Letty, you mentioned millennials a little while ago, and I know that there are a number of studies that suggest that for millennials, the number one issue is the environment and sustainability. And this can be viewed as a non-political issue. You know, what is your organization doing for the environment? But as the government rolls back regulations, a number of companies have come right out and said, we recognize that we have the opportunity now to return to old behaviors, but our values now support sustainability and environmental responsibility, and therefore we are going to continue to behave as though those regulations were still in place. Does that type of thing buy any goodwill with that generation, do you think?
Oh yes, there's definitely. Millennials, in all the studies that we made, millennials are really demanding that their CEOs have to express their point of view and have a stand on different environmental issues like sustainability and climate change and many others. And there have been results because of the answers of the millennials that they really support a company and they will buy more products or services or support companies where the CEO have spoken and have taken a stand on those issues. And not only those issues, but in many others, like, you know, for example, in Mexico, we are having presidential elections in the next 45 days. And some CEOs have expressed also, they have stand situations on what's going on with different presidential candidates. And millennials really, really support this.
Just to throw another data point out there, a study from Cone found that 76% of millennials consider a company's social and environmental commitments when deciding where to work, and nearly 2/3 won't take a job if a prospective employer does not have strong corporate social responsibility practices.
Yes, and it's different from the baby boomers of the X generation, because I think they have not been very active. And for example, baby boomers are more interested maybe in their financials, on their retirement plans or something. But definitely millennials stand out for demanding this and working and supporting more companies where CEOs have really presented a stand on this, on corporate social responsibility.
You know, I guess I'm sort of the dark side thinker in today's program, but once you start this process, you can't stop. Once you open your mouth, you're going to be asked constantly to pontificate about anything that's out there, and that is often the hardest part of this. That once you let this loose, you can't easily put it back in the bottle. It's interesting to me discussing, especially companies that that start off on this foot because they have lots of great things to talk about, and then something happens and they don't have a lot of great things to talk about. They got a lot of bad things to talk about. The only reason I raise this point is because one of the things that we tend to suggest almost immediately is some kind of training for these people who probably have not had much training in public presentations and things, or at least it's been my experience. I just a caution on what you suggest. I have yet to meet a senior person who felt they needed training of any kind. But, and I remember working with one senior executive at a company, and he actually stood me up. I went to Florida from New York to visit with him, didn't show up. We made 3 different visits to different parts of the country. And finally, he comes back to the home base, which is not that far from my office, and we set up a morning to talk. A 3-hour session. He shows up in the last 15 minutes of that session. Real nice guy, and I actually know him, but he showed up to say that he was sorry that he couldn't participate in my previous efforts and that sort of thing. And I said, well, what's the story, George? And he said, well, actually, my wife was on my case from the start of this idea. She said, I've been married to you for 31 years, and I can't train you to do anything. What can a guy you don't even know do in 45 minutes? And so I said, well, George, we were talking about coaching. He said, oh, coaching. I can always use some coaching. So when you start introducing this to people at that level, talk about how they look at this stuff. And it seems like a minor point, but it really is a major point with these very busy and very stressed people, it seems to me. We're talking about something at very high level that they need some high level advice to do, not just PR advice.
Well, I think there are always going to be certain CEOs that are just natural speakers, they've got that kind of dynamic persona that people want to listen to. I think back to the era, those of us of a certain age remember back when the airline industry was being deregulated. And the CEO of American Airlines, Robert Crandall, was really an out-front executive and was whether you agreed with his position or not, you had to appreciate and respect the fact that he was being a thought leader. And I think that helped build not just his own personal reputation, but the reputation of the company.
But you have to think that there's a role for the communications people in the organization as it relates to the issue of articulating your views on social, political types of topics. There was a book written by Robert Phillips, who was a former president of Edelman. I think he was Edelman EMEA. And it was, the title of the book was provocative, to say the least. It was titled "Trust Me, PR is Dead." And his premise was that organizations are going to be forced to behave well. His view was that public relations is essentially just spinning bad behavior and putting lipstick on a pig, and companies aren't going to be able to get away with that as more and more people demand transparency around your practices as it relates to values and social issues and sustainability and the like. And once organizations start doing that, they're simply not going to need PR anymore, and that the organizations that don't do that are going to fall by the wayside. I took issue with that. I even recorded something of a rant for my book reviews podcast, which he didn't like, by the way. He actually got back to me on that. But I still think you need help telling your story, whether the story is what you're doing about something that's bad or just sharing something you're doing that's good. I mean, even if every organization out there is doing great stuff when it comes to social justice and the environment, you're going to be competing for the attention of the media and the public, and at the same time not look like you're just blowing your own horn. Nothing. Okay.
I think your my comment about the role for communicators is we really are probably the most essential ingredient in the CEO's success in moving down this pathway, because we're one of the few functions in the company that really listens to what's going on and has ideas of what people are thinking, saying, and doing out there. And so I think one of our major roles is being sort of completing the feedback loop constantly with what people are thinking inside the organization and outside the organization. But the purpose of it is to provide the executive with options of things to think and talk about based on what the intelligence, you might say, we're bringing back are constantly bringing to this individual and the people around him or her. So we play a vital role in these two sides of it. I think understanding what's going on and what the impact is, but even more essentially, helping these individuals understand the opportunities they have. I call them options that they might consider seriously adding to their collection of topics they want to talk about.
Yes, and also because.
Go ahead, Letty.
Yes, and I also believe that the role of the communicator is quite fundamental here in reminding the CEO about that he needs to defend the values and the reputation and the conduct of the company, and in developing all these messages and this strategy, not only for their external audiences, but starting with their employees. Because it's when they will really see that they have someone there representing them that stands for the philosophy and the values of the company externally, and that he is not silent about that. So it's our own role, our communication role, to be there at all times, before, during, and after the CEO speaks.
Now, one of the reasons I like to talk of values. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Jim, you had mentioned that the CEO has to sort of speak from his own set of values, and Shel, you're mentioning we need to define the role of a communicator here. And I think what this comes down to is the importance of the relationship between the communicator, at least the lead communicator, and the CEO. The communications person can only be as effective as that relationship with the leadership, in this case, the top leader of the company, allows him or her to be.
Now, I think this is a really critical point. One of the things that when I'm talking to our colleagues on various topics, especially about getting more attention, getting access, and having more impact, I often ask, how many of the audience actually study leadership? It's awfully arrogant of us to walk in and jibber jabber about all these data that we have and the things that we like from our perspective, but we have very little understanding of who these people are, why they're in a leadership position at all, why would someone want this frickin' job, so I really advise people, if you want to talk to leaders about leadership, you better be studying leaders and understanding who they are and what they do and what they think about. There are patterns that you can learn from, both of doing things well and doing things. But to be just as talking about, talking with executives and senior people, when you have that kind of insight, you get that from studying leaders of all kinds. Most of us don't spend a lot of time with leaders. Most of us aren't allowed to. But that you can still have some pretty great expertise in who these people are and what they do, because they are around us, and they inform you with the stories you tell and the examples you give and the suggestions you make going forward.
Well, let's jibber jabber about a little more of that data to shift gears just a little. 65% of people across the U.S., China, Germany, India, and the UK want to work for an organization with a strong social conscience. In response, according to PricewaterhouseCoopers, 36% of HR professionals are building their hiring strategies around their organization's social and environmental stances. And the first thing that occurs to me when I hear this is that HR is out there recruiting based on this stuff. And meanwhile, the communications department and the CEO are not talking about that to their respective audiences, and that can create a disconnect.
So how do you find these emotionally charged or issues-related groups of stakeholders if you want to go hire them?
How do you find them?
How do you find that segment that's ideologically segmented?
Well, the data seems to suggest that it's most millennials, and that's the largest part of the workforce right now. I know that here where I work, we're dealing with the fact that the economy is in pretty good shape. Unemployment is low, and we're trying to attract people out of college to come live and work for their first job in the Bay Area, where the cost of living is, I believe, currently the highest in the country. So we have to find other ways to try to attract them, and attracting them to a culture that is based on some values that are taken very seriously in the organization is one of the ways that we're going about that. So that's one of the messages that's being delivered.
Yes, and definitely millennials, more than any other generation, they are expecting a CEO to champion their own values and their all these support to social and environmental and sustainability programs. So they are really demanding this, and that's why it's quite important that there is an alignment, as you mentioned, Shel, between what human resources is doing and what communication is doing, so the CEO can really speak about this as one only message and not having different messages around.
Let me throw another, and this is the last one I have here, so I'll stop doing this at this point. But brands that earn the most positive sentiment online are those that share stories about their corporate social responsibility initiatives over other categories of content. This was a study from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation and IBM, and it found that, and I'm quoting here, social impact and sustainability news drives more positive sentiment in all but a few industries and situations. And the same study also quantified the impact of that sentiment on a brand's reputation, which many deem as important as profitability, and many believe actually correlates to profit. So the idea that talking about the things that you're doing in these areas actually drives positive sentiment, which then drives profit. So again, I think it's important not just that organizations have values and act on them, but that we talk about them.
I think it's essential, and that when I'm talking about talking internally to get used to doing this communicating, one of the great problem areas for internally in organizations is that there is really never enough conversation about this from the top of the organization about what the values are. When I first meet a corporation, they're virtually always in trouble. One of the first things we talk about is what do people believe around here? What do you need people around here for this kind of company to have this sort of problem beginning in the first place? And quite often, the values we're talking about here so aggressively are really just plaques on the wall. Yep. And the CEO doesn't talk about them. He doesn't know, or she doesn't really, maybe believes in one of them. I call it the 19th hole rule. Most company value systems, this sounds a great generalization, but really come out of some other activities, and people sort of like write them on the back of a napkin, and then a week later they're posted around the company. But there is no solidity, there's no solidness to these ideas, and the management staff and the leadership, the management of the company, is right down to the first line supervisors, never talk about this stuff until something of an adverse nature comes up, and all of a sudden, we're a company with values, and we're a company with principles and that sort of stuff. This is a really important idea. If you're going to talk about values, you really better have to understand what the values are, and the people in the company need to understand what those values are as well. So this, to me, is the real testing ground and proving ground before executives wander out and talk about things like sustainability, which is a very complicated subject, and a lot of people are paying attention to sustainability. There's no question about that, and know a lot about it.
And that's where I think that's where the importance of values, exemplifying those values, and the communication team can support the CEO in doing that, where you take individuals that have done something that truly lives up to one or more of those values. So it's not just a intangible term, but here's a person that they can relate with, even if they don't know them. They're part of their company, and now we can see somebody doing something with integrity or with honor or courage or whatever your values are.
Yeah, there are a lot of organizations that have been true to their values for a long time. I'm thinking of Patagonia as a great example. Other organizations claim they have values, but they're sort of forced into solidifying them by a crisis. I think, Jim, it was you who mentioned Nike earlier. What happened in Nike was that there had been, over a period of time, a number of women going to HR asserting that they had been assaulted or verbally abused in the organization and weren't taken seriously. And finally, a group of women, and these were senior women at the organization, ran a sort of a guerrilla survey of other women in the company, and they presented the results to the CEO with a number of women who had this kind of experience. And that's what led to action, not just that he was presented with this information, but that they also made the results of the survey public. Another example of this is Starbucks, right? Which, I mean, their vision from the time they opened their doors for the first time was that this is a third space where the community can gather. It's not home, it's not work. You can come in, you don't have to buy a cup of coffee, you can come in here and use this as a community space. And, if you do, you're probably going to buy coffee and we'll make a lot of money. When a couple of black men were in one of the stores waiting for a friend and not buying anything yet, but asked to use the bathroom, the manager called the police. They were arrested. The reaction of the company was first to fire that manager, second to apologize directly to the men. The CEO did that himself. Howard Schultz, the chairman, has come out and said our bathrooms are open to anybody who needs them. That was a more recent response. They're also closing all of their stores so that they can conduct implicit bias training, not your typical, diversity training, but training on this idea of unconscious bias. And, there are people who are saying it's inadequate, it's not enough, there needs to be ongoing efforts. But it certainly has calmed the protests and sort of staked out that territory now for Starbucks to continue demonstrating their commitment to their original philosophy of being an open third space for the community.
Well, Starbucks is an interesting example because there's actually growing criticism of their response to this from various minority communities because they're just saying this is what this company does. It's not really an effective mechanism anymore because doing good is what they do, but they don't do enough good to make a difference. And I mean, there's been some very acidic commentary on the companies, promoting this closed offer. It's going to cost them $50 million to close their stores. Well, they got $50 million they can do this with, that kind of thing. Why not $50 million raising the minimum wage in certain places might be a bigger contribution. So I guess the lesson is, when you start going in this arena and it makes you feel really good, it isn't necessarily going to turn out quite the way you planned it. I think where Starbucks gets real kudos is sticking with it, because this isn't the first circumstance where they've been criticized, and criticized internationally because they're everywhere. And they really they're driving home that these good behaviors can have a cost, but it's worth the price because they are the kind of place people want to work for.
We have about 7 minutes left, so I just want to give everybody who's watching live an opportunity to throw us a question, tweet it to with the hashtag COF33 and see if we can sneak it in. Ned, you were about to say something.
Yeah, it's a kind of a maxim that when even if you think you've got a great reputation and great values, some bad things can happen, and how you address those bad things directly and in order to make a difference, that you can take a negative and turn it into a positive.
Or maybe even neutralize it going forward. I think this is a risk, and it has to be part of the advice we give in going forward, especially on issues that are what happened in the stores and in other community settings where we still have big police issues in this country and race issues related to that.
And there are some strategies and some actions that you can take in order to prevent that as much as possible, like ensuring, for example, market intelligence is up to date before speaking, that you really have the correct information because before the CEO speaks, that you strongly consider the employees and prospects, that you have the pros and cons and you present this to the board, there is like maybe preparing like a guideline or something like that with the CEOs and with the other executive team before you really stand up for something, in order to really try to be as sure as possible that you are going to provide the correct message when the CEO is standing for something.
That's interesting. I was just doing a quick search and I found this from May 15th, 2 days ago, put out over PR Newswire. Gen Z is bypassing the traditional political system and focusing on consumerism as a channel for change. This is a new study released today. It's titled "Dollars and Change, Young People Tap Brands as Agents of Social Change." More than 76% of Gen Z, these are the ones who are following the millennials, has purchased or is open to purchasing a brand or product to support the issues that the brand stands for. In addition, and more costly, more than 67% have stopped purchasing or would consider doing so if the company stood for something or behaved in a way that doesn't align with their values. So, again, this research is pretty consistent. It just continues to pour out, reinforcing the mountain of research that's already out there.
But so if you want to take on a social issue, how do you determine what's the right one for your company or your organization that aligns with your market and your stakeholders and your values, and you can actually do something that moves the dial?
Right. And again, I think the answer is partly making sure that it's consistent with your existing values, that it has something to do with the line of business that you're in, and also a really good, solid understanding of the stakeholder audiences that you're trying to appeal to, not just customers, but employees and investors as well.
One thing that I often suggest to people doing this or planning to go into this is to actually have them talk to other CEOs who are doing it. And it's often quite a powerful suggestion to help them to make this connection so that they can ask the kinds of questions that come up in their mind that they might not ask someone like us, no matter what our relationship happens to be. What I found is other executives who are highly visible, whether they're authors or whether they're commentators on social issues, they're very happy to talk to other CEOs and see what their feelings are and what's going on in their lives as a result of it. And it's something to think about as we give advice to these people to begin moving in this direction. And many things we've talked about in this program are going to come up in those conversations.
Absolutely. Letty, any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Not just building on what Jim said. I think that you don't have to be the only CEO that speaks in something, but if there are many CEOs that really stand up for something, you can really shape the environment and really support and influence on some legislation or something that is going on externally. So you can, it's not a race, you don't have to be the first one, but if you do it jointly, not with other CEOs, but also, as I had mentioned, with other executives from your own company, then you can really get and have a position and get a result from that.
Ned, any last thoughts from you?
Well, Shel, we talk about the CEO and what he says and what he does, but in some of these cases, that the CEO might be right out in front of an issue and leading the way, and maybe the employees, the associates are acting not in line with that, and now they've got some explaining to do. So really, the issue comes down to the communication function of helping leadership share those values, share the vision, make sure everybody understands it. So when it comes time to make a decision, whether it's something that affects the environment or something that affects employees sitting in, or customers sitting in your store and not buying anything and asking to use the bathroom, you want them to make a decision based on those values and not to have to think about it, but the values are already ingrained in them, so they will act the right way.
Great. And that takes us to the end of our time. I do want to let everyone know that the next episode of Circle of Fellows, episode 34, is scheduled for this same time, noon Eastern, on Thursday, June 21st. The topic is leadership skill building. Leadership skills, something that came up in the course of the discussion today. Jim, you'll be participating in that conversation, so we'll see you back the third Thursday of June. Also joining us will be Marianne McCauley, Barbara Puffer, and Angela Sinicus. So that should be a terrific conversation. Ned, Jim, Letty, I want to thank you for the time and the insights today. And also, you know, she keeps telling me that I don't have to thank her publicly, but yes, I do. Anna Willie, who does all of the coordination for Circle of Fellows behind the scenes, from lining up the panelists to making sure that everybody has the information about when to show up, you know, in the hangout here. So thanks as ever to Anna for her hard work. Yep. And so we'll see you all next month. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. It was great to participate.
Thank you, Shel.
Thank you.